We are now recording. So this is the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership's very first virtual water quality monitoring training. COVID has stymied our ability to do the real fun stuff, the going out into the stream to do the assessments in group. But we think that with the training that you'll receive this morning and enough of the orientation materials that we've sent out to you, that you'll feel confident enough to go out without our assistance to monitor a stream on your own. So this morning, we're going to cram a lot into 2 short hours. We'll review what a watershed is. We'll talk about why organizations like the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership monitor our streams, do habitat assessments of our streams. We'll describe the different types of streams that we see in the Lower Raritan watershed, the high gradient and low gradient, and how you assess the 2 different types. We'll provide a general overview of monitoring the conditions, the environmental conditions around your streams, land uses and whatnot, and then take a deep dive into evaluating the health of the stream. In much more serious fashion. So we'll talk about the flora and fauna, velocity of the stream, the stream bank stability in more detail, and provide tips and tricks and insights for you to assess the quality and the health of things like your stream banks, so that you can evaluate the overall health of a stream. We'll talk about safety issues when you're going out into a stream, the supplies that you need, and then most important for us is how do you adopt a stream? So again, the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership is one of the newest nonprofits, nonprofit watershed associations in New Jersey. We focus our attention on the urban core of around the Lower Raritan. And we encourage stewardship and citizen science in data gathering around our streams. So we want folks who live in the watershed to be actively involved in reporting out data, understanding how our streams function, understanding the health of the streams, and communicating that information to others. We feel that through science and stewardship, we will better be able to restore our waterways and come together to improve the health of our natural environment. So I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin now. Caitlin, are you there? Okay, so I'll just give you an update on Caitlin. So Caitlin's voice is a little ragged. She has been suffering from COVID the last 2 weeks. She's on the mend. However, she did have to check in with her physician this morning. So we will, I guess, bring her in as she's able. Right now, I'll just give you another sort of bit of insight into the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership and why we do what we do. We are working to restore a historically degraded waterway and watershed. So the waterway, of course, being the Lower Raritan, which suffered a lot of legacy pollutants from the last couple of centuries, a lot of industrial polluting directly into the Raritan, and yet also into the tributaries of the Raritan. And we have three primary areas of focus: education and outreach, water quality monitoring, and watershed restoration. And we see our water quality monitoring, our civic science work as part and parcel of education and outreach, but it's also data gathering. So that's part of our science initiative. Okay, John, you want to advance through the slides here? John, do you want to talk about the ambassadors program?
Sure thing. If everybody can hear me, if they want to put the little hand up sign or something like that, it's fun because I get the whole screen of the presentation, and I really like making eye contact and seeing what people are doing. But we are in a different world right now, and I just see myself as a tiny screen. So I'm hoping everyone's out there. I see some thumbs up on the top of my screen, so I'm going to go forward. So Watershed Ambassador Program, from what I remember, I did in 2013 to 14, then 14 to 15 as a team leader. It's basically broken up into three sections: partnership projects, which this might be considered one of, volunteer monitor training, habitat and biological, and then a series of presentations about the environment, focusing on the watershed, non-point source pollution, and kind of, as Heather mentioned before, what we can do as citizens of the watershed. I was born and raised in Bound Brook, went to school in New Brunswick, and I live in Somerville right now. So I'm kind of born and bred in the in this area. And Caitlin's here, but I'll skip on to the next slide and set her up to talk about what a watershed even is in the first place.
Okay, hi everyone. I think I heard, I'm sorry, I had a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m. this morning, unfortunately, so it lined up, the timing did not line up well. But yeah, I'm Caitlin. It's nice to see some of you and meet you all. Yeah, and again, I'm the Watershed Ambassador for WMA9, and I think I heard Heather saying that I am currently recovering from COVID, so my voice is a little bit off, but, and if I look a little disheveled, it's because I feel a little bit disheveled as well, but we're getting through. But yeah, so a watershed is, and you can skip to the next slide as well, John. When we're talking about a watershed, we actually are talking more so about the land than we are about the water itself. So when you're thinking of a watershed, you're really thinking of an area of land, like you see depicted on this slide. It's an area of lands that all drains into a common body of water. So that common body of water could be a lake, it could be a river, a stream, a bay. It's once you define your body of water, you can then think on the land. When rain hits that land, we're only thinking of surface water here. We're not thinking of like groundwater or anything like that. When water hits the land, where is that water going to flow and where is it all going to collect? So it's all defined by regional topography. So when we say topography, we're talking about the rise and fall of the land. So we're talking about hills, we're talking about valleys, that kind of thing. So we're thinking about basically gravity. Like we're thinking about, if I'm thinking in the mind of a water droplet, if I'm a water droplet and I hit this hill, where am I going to flow? And watersheds can also range in scale. So you can have, you can define your watershed by one lake in one area and just think about in that immediate space to that lake, where is the water draining into this body of water? But you can also kind of zoom out and think about watersheds on a larger scale. Like how we do in New Jersey, where we have different watershed management areas and we have different watershed regions. Like you can think of things on a very large scale and follow your water droplet farther down the river, farther down the landscape. So that's a little bit more information about what a watershed is. So we can go to the next slide. So yeah, New Jersey has 20 different watershed management areas, and there is a watershed ambassador for each of these areas. So today we're talking about the Lower Raritan Watershed, which is WMA 9, which again is where I am based out of and where the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership is based. So the next slide shows you the outline of WMA 9. It's the Lower Raritan, it also includes South River and Lawrence Brook. And then if you go to the next slide, John's going to explain a little bit more about the Lower Raritan watershed itself.
Yeah, so the Lower Raritan, I'm not going to read off the slides here. You got the really cool graphic. You have the description on the right-hand side. It would be interesting to know, this would be a great time to show like in real life. I'm trying to think of how to turn it into digital. Show of hands where different people are from. Let's just pretend people are scattered all throughout here. So you could be at the top of the watershed in the Watchung Ridge, if anyone's been in that area. Berkeley Heights, Watchung, New Providence. It's rocky. If you were to dig a hole, you might put a dent in your shovel because there's not necessarily boulders up there, but it's a rockier soil. As you work your way down through Highland Park, through South River, down to Freehold and Millstone, you end up, if you were to dig a hole, you would dig a hole in the sand. So we have, like, in our little WMA 9, we have sort of a microcosm, and we have our own environment where we have rocky soil, sandy soil. We have all different type of plants and animals going on there too. But more or less, we have the Raritan River, and we have the South River, and we have tributaries going through there all over. We have urban areas, we have suburban areas, and we have completely rural farmland preservation areas. So it's kind of fun and unique to be working in the Lower Raritan for all these years, because every year you see something new. Maybe last year, and it goes kind of, this pendulum swings both ways. So the longer you're here with us monitoring, the kind of more fun and exciting it gets as the years go on. So next slide, I believe, is back to Caitlin.
So again, we're talking about monitoring streams to monitor the human effect on streams. So we have to think about what is affecting those streams. And in New Jersey in particular, there's a problem with impervious surfaces and the growth of impervious surfaces. When we're talking about impervious surfaces, we're talking about things like roads, parking lots, houses. An impervious surface is just it's a surface that water can't penetrate through. So if you look at this diagram, you see on the top left, we have a lot of natural ground cover where there is 0% impervious surfaces because all of it is dirt or already existing water. So when water hits the grounds, the water can percolate or infiltrate the soil, and you don't have this rush of water getting into our streams, and we don't have a lot of water running off of the land and carrying things with it. As you have a higher residential density, as you have more commercial industry growing, you see more impervious surfaces. And if you skip to the next slide, you can actually see in the Lower Raritan Watershed, this diagram or this animated GIF shows the growth of impervious surfaces in the Lower Raritan. The darker the color, the more impervious surface, or again, the more concrete or pavement or any surfaces like that, the more that there is in the watershed. So you can see over the years that the impervious surfaces have grown in the Lower Raritan. They're growing in prevalence. So when we're thinking about runoff, we're thinking about water that's hitting these impervious surfaces, and it's rushing over the land instead of percolating into the soil. And when the water is moving, it's carrying things with it. And we call these things non-point source pollution. So there are many examples of non-point source pollution. And this list that, if you go to the next slide, you can see, this is definitely not an exhaustive list of all the different types of pollution that we find in the Lower Raritan or in watersheds in general. So you see the big buzz non-point source pollution is always like litter. The Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership has done projects or has done cleanups where you go. The last one we did was behind an IHOP, and it was just bottles and bottles and bottles. Like, we see a lot of litter, we see a lot of plastic bottles, cans, all that kind of stuff. Plastic, just a ton of plastic in general. There are also other types of pollution. We have oil and grease that can come from cars, so make sure that you're checking your car regularly and making sure that oil is not leaking from your car. Pesticides and fertilizers, the plant food that we put onto our lawns to make them green, or golf courses put them onto their lawns to make them green. Pesticides that prevent bugs from eating the plants in your vegetable garden. All of this stuff can be picked up by water and rushed into our streams and rivers. Pathogens that can come from manure or from our dog poop, which is why we should pick up after our dogs. And sediment can also be considered a non-point source pollution, or a source of non-point source pollution, particularly if we're taking away plants from an area, or if we're taking away the trees. the plants and the trees have roots that typically keep that sediment in place. And if you take away the trees and the plants, there is no longer a root system to keep the sediment in place. So that sediment becomes non-point source pollution because it's getting into our waterways when it's not supposed to be there because of human actions. So these are a bunch of different types of non-point source pollution, all of which we see happening in Lower Raritan, which makes it all the more important to try to mitigate against these points of non-point source pollution and also monitor for their effects.
Yeah, so the LRWP engages in a number of different types of water quality monitoring to figure out the impacts of all these various sources of pollution. So there are 4 primary monitoring activities, which you see here in the left-hand column: visual habitat assessments, benthic macroinvertebrate monitoring, pathogens chemical monitoring, and fish tissue sampling. And we engage in each of these types of monitoring with a variety of different goals. So for visual habitat assessments, what we're looking for in terms of pollution are obvious signs of litter, obvious signs of stream bank erosion that would kick up that sediment that Caitlin was talking about. In terms of our goals here, we want to identify sites for cleanup. In the short term, we want to involve the community to bring awareness to the issues of stream degradation. Midterm, we want to identify those streams that we could involve the community in improving or reducing the amount of erosion and restoring. And then the more we monitor our stream segments using these visual habitat assessments protocol that you'll learn about today, the better we'll understand climate change impacts to our streams as well. We also go out regularly to our streams and catch bugs. We do macroinvertebrate monitoring, and we do this type of monitoring so that we can understand the impacts that pollutants have on the food chain. Our macroinvertebrates, the critters that live in our stream bed, are really at the bottom of the food chain, and if they are not thriving, then our entire ecosystem is going to be compromised. I think Caitlin will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but our goals with the macroinvertebrate monitoring are really to ensure that we can put maximum protections around our streams when we do find the sensitive species in the stream bed. When we find those critters, sensitive macroinvertebrates, that gives us license to advocate for more protections around those streams, meaning larger buffers, keeping lands out of development's way. And so that's why we like looking for and finding the very sensitive species at the bottom of the food chain. We also do pathogens and chemical monitoring. Pathogens, as Caitlin said, are disease-causing bacteria that can be found in manure or dog poop, fecal waste, broken sanitary sewer systems. We monitor for the presence of pathogens in our waterways, and we report out that information, particularly for sites where we know that people are regularly recreating. And we give the information that we gather as citizen scientists back to the community so they can make informed decisions about whether they want to let their dog play in the water, whether they want to canoe or kayak or swim. We also do some fish tissue sampling, and we have a surprisingly large number of people in the Lower Raritan who fish for consumption. They get a lot of their protein from what they're catching in the Raritan River. And our fish tissue sampling work gives us insight into how potentially dangerous that might be, what health risks are posed by that. So And all of these programs are in one way or another open to public involvement through trainings like these that will give you the know-how and the skills to understand how to assess the environment and report out data to other residents, your neighbors, your families, and others in our watershed. Okay, next slide.
Hang on, I was muted. We'll go through this relatively quickly just because we have a good primer about, we're going to be talking a lot about visual assessments, obviously, because that's why we're here. But yeah, essentially, as Heather was saying, stream assessments help us monitor the effects of human impact. They help us monitor the effects of all of that pollution that's getting into the stream environments. So today we're going to be talking about how to do a visual, or it's also called a habitat assessment. So we're going to be looking at how to assess stream characteristics and how we can then use those stream characteristics to assess and determine ecosystem health. So you can see a couple of pictures of us doing visual assessments. In the corner, we'll be talking about the different types of things that we're looking for, like canopy cover, stream width, turbidity. We'll get into definitions and how to do all of that pretty soon. So the other type of assessment, as Heather was saying, is a biological assessment. So this is just a little bit more information on that. So it involves a sampling of benthic macroinvertebrates, which is a really fancy way of saying stream bugs. Benthic is meaning that bottom, benthic means bottom environment of the stream. Macroinvertebrates means big bugs without a spine. So that's essentially, it's a very long word to describe crunchy bugs in the stream, essentially. And you can see the picture in the bottom right corner. There are in that ice cube tray, in the top left of that ice cube tray, there are probably 5 or 6 bugs in that little tiny ice cube sample. So they can be pretty small, but they're very important for the stream because they indicate water quality. There are different classes of pollution tolerant macroinvertebrates. So there are some macroinvertebrates, like Heather was saying, that are very intolerant to pollution. So if we find these bugs, like this stonefly, the little bug that's holding the net, he really doesn't like, or they really don't like pollution. So if you find them, you know that the stream has a good temperature, the stream has good good habitat for the bugs, has a good oxygen level, those type of parameters. So what is in the stream can actually help us assess how the stream itself is doing. So that's a little bit more about biological assessments. And then the next slide is talking about the visual habitat assessment. And again, Heather went over in pretty good detail about why we're doing visual habitat assessments and what that data is used for. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So I can't remember. John, are you doing these slides or am I doing these slides?
Yep, I'm up. Okay, so like I mentioned before, real quick when I showed over the map, on the top you have, on the top of the watershed, the further you go north, the more rocky and soily the soil is, and the further south you go, the more sandy and loamy the soil is. So that's what we say, that's what we mean when we say a rocky bottom versus a soft bottom. Another phrase that you'll hear us use and that you will also be using yourself when you're talking to your fellow monitors or people who ask you questions, what the heck are you doing with your waders on in the river all Saturday morning? Now you'll say a high gradient stream versus a low gradient stream. Gradient is the high gradient stream is the rocky stream. The low gradient stream is the sandy stream. There's less diversity in the soil and in the bottom, in the soft bottom, which is also known as low gradient stream. So here you see it right here. High gradient is usually in the higher areas in our watershed, but not necessarily across the board, but just that's kind of the way it's broken down here. You'll see things called riffles and runs and pools in a high gradient stream. You're not going to see as much of a diversity in the low gradient stream. Don't worry if some of these words are over your head right now. We have like 400 pictures coming up, so don't worry. Here's another picture of a rocky bottom stream. If anybody wants to put their hand up to see why we refer to this as a rocky bottom stream, feel free. You see a lot of rocks and a lot of boulders in these streams. And even if you were to look in the big picture on the bottom, of the picture, next to these two huge boulders, you'll still see some smaller rocks, some teeny tiny rocks, some medium-sized rocks. There's a higher gradient of stones in the bottom. That creates more spaces for these bugs to live in, which is, it's a healthier habitat for them. And this is a picture from the Ireland Brook, which, if anybody wants to put a hand up, I'm putting my own hand up, but nobody can see me. If anybody wants to put a hand up, if they live in that area, we do have some sites that can be monitored. And eventually, at the end of the day, we would love to have people volunteer and monitor and kind of adopt a stream. And we have a list of a handful of sites that we still need somebody for. Soft bottom, I'm not going to, repeat the exact same thing. Low gradient is lower area in the Lower Raritan, especially. A little more silty, a little slower sometimes, but not always, not necessarily. Lower gradient, almost no riffles. And a riffle is, a lot of people will call them ripples, which makes a little bit more sense because it has a ripply sound. When you look at a river, you know how sometimes you'll see, especially streams in your neighborhood and stuff, you'll see bubbles and a little bit of white water and the ripples. That's, you're looking at a riffle, which is a, ecological term for bubbly area that goes over rocks. Here's what a muddy bottom or low gradient stream looks like. You can't see, you can see if you look under the bridge there, you don't see huge cobbles and boulders and freestones and rocks and pebbles and all these different things. It's kind of all uniform sandy soil. And that's a little bit further south from where we were in the last picture. You're right near Englishtown, Monroe, stuff like that. This is the Pine Brook. So this is the same watershed, very different, but all of this water eventually drains into the Lower Raritan, which eventually drains into the Raritan Bay, which goes into the Atlantic Ocean. So even though we're part of the Raritan River watershed, like Caitlin mentioned before, if you take a larger zoom out, we're also part of the Atlantic Ocean watershed, which is shared with, almost every single state on the East Coast. Now, this part, I think we're going back to Caitlin.
Yeah, so now we're actually going to start filling out the data sheet, which you all should have gotten in the prep email for this. So one thing to note when you're filling out these habitat assessment sheets is that you see at the very top of the assessment sheet, it says habitat assessment - high gradient. So there are two, and that's why we went into such detail about high gradient versus low gradient, or again, high gradient is rocky, low gradient is muddy. There are two different assessment sheets that you do, one for the high gradient, one for the low gradient, and you will know if you do go out and decide to help assess the streams, we will tell you which type of stream the stream that you are assessing is. So we'll let you know that it is a high gradient, or we'll let you know that it's a low gradient stream, and they're honestly not that different. The data sheets aren't that different from each other. The sheet that you see on this slide is the same between high gradient and low gradient, but later on we'll point out the differences because again, we were talking about how the streams are so different from each other. The high gradient streams have all of that rock, and the low gradient streams have all of that mud. So when you're assessing the habitat, you have to think about it just a little bit differently. So we're going to be going through in detail the high gradient assessment sheet, and then at the end we'll talk about the differences between the high gradient and the low gradient assessment sheet. So the first part is the general information. So a lot of this, some of the stuff we provide to you and some of the stuff you take on the day. So county, you obviously will know the county, will give you the county that you're in, or you can look up the county that you're in. The survey team, so you just list first and last name of everybody who is out with you. You should always assess, and we'll repeat. You'll hear a lot of information more than once because a lot of this information is important, so we want you to hear it more than once, but you should always be going out with a buddy, at least one other person when you're assessing. So survey team should never have just one name. It should always be more than one name. The time, this is just important for, you should report the time that you start the assessment. It's just important for time of day. So we can get an assessment of what time of day you're assessing the stream, and the date. And then air temperature and water temperature. There's a picture of a thermometer that you can use here. The watershed ambassadors each get a thermometer when we go out. I also know people who have used turkey basters before as their thermometer. So we want to get a good measure of air temperature and of water temperature. And we'll talk later about safety as well, what temperature the water should be for it to be safe to assess. Site name is something that we provide to you. So we'll provide all of this information that's at the bottom here. So monitoring site name is that Pete 001. I'm guessing that would be Petersbrook based off of the site name. So you have the monitoring site name there. Yep, Petersbrook, the location description, and then some more useful information that we'll provide to you that you can use to fill your sheet. So a lot of this stuff is generally quite intuitive when you're filling it out. So the next slide is the watershed management area that you're in. This will almost always, if not always, be 9, which is the Lower Raritan Watershed. We went over what WMAs or watershed management areas are a little bit earlier. And then you also have your segment identification, that latitude and longitude, which are the numbers that we provide to you that basically delocate or show the exact spot that you are assessing. So you can use, to find it, you can plug it into a GPS if you do have a smartphone to locate your stream, the exact location that you're supposed to be assessing. And then that estimate of segment length, it says aim for 100 meters. Your segment length should be the stretch of stream that you're looking at when you are filling out this assessment sheet. So 100 meters is about the length, or it actually is, it's the exact length of a football field. So you have to consider a pretty decent length of the stream. It might require you to walk up and down the stream a little bit of ways to really get a good assessment of the air of that whole area. So that's just something to keep in mind. 100 meters is a little bit longer than you think it's going to be, and you should take all of that 100 meters into account when filling out this assessment sheet. So the weather should be, you should cross off or circle the weather that best matches what is happening while you are doing the assessment. So it could have been raining earlier in the day, but it could be sunny in the afternoon. So you would mark it off as sunny. You would mark it as what it is, how the weather is doing when you are actually out standing by or in the stream. And you just mark one of the options. You just circle one of them. And then I think I'm passing off to John here.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to go through the different water conditions. Now, I understand that some of these words might be new to people or used in a different way. So it's kind of tough. Like in person, I'd be able to see if someone starts looking around and I can tell that I lose them or they missed something. So feel free to use the chat. That's why we're doing it this way. It actually works out because it's rainy today and we might have had to cancel the training anyway because of the rain. But if any of these words are over your head, you can look them up or just ask us in the chat, because there's a good chance if you don't know what the heck turbidity is or anaerobic or what exactly scum means in this tense, there might be somebody else in this training that doesn't know. So feel free to ask those questions. We're going to go through these not quickly, but this is not the most conceptual part of this whole thing. So odor, when you get to a stream, I usually like to smell it first. That sounds weird actually when I say it that way. But what happens is once you're at a place for a little while, you get used to the smell. So you might get to a place and you're like, oh wow, it really smells kind of like almost like rotten eggs here. And then in a couple minutes you look at each other and say, oh, it doesn't smell like eggs anymore. It must have just been that moment. But there's a whole theory on why your nose does that. But check the smells right away as soon as you get there. You're looking for things that are listed here. Normal would be no smell, sewage, petroleum, so gasoline or oily kind of smell, chemical, unknown chemical smell, but something that does not smell like leaves or an animal or a tree, and anaerobic, which smells a lot like sulfur or rotten egg. And there's reasons that we're looking for each one of these, and we could spend probably another 45 minutes on just this slide alone, why one of these is more important or why one of these would be an indicator of something else. But we're going to skip through them for now.
The one thing I will interject here is,
Yep.
just to make sure, because when we go out and do visual assessments now, we're always wearing a mask because, again, you should always be going out with another person. So if you are wearing a mask, just make sure that you take your mask off when you're trying to smell the stream, because otherwise you're just going to be smelling basically your own breath. And I've made that mistake before where I'm like, it just smells bad, and it's not because of the stream, it's because of me. So make sure that you take your mask off when you're trying to smell the stream.
Yeah, true. So this is boots on the ground advice. So everybody write that one down. Turbidity is a scientific word for referring to the clarity of the water. I'm going to read this one because this is kind of one of those more conceptual ones, but turbidity is not the color. The water can be different colors. You might see aquamarine water that's turbid or not turbid. You might see an olive-colored water that's turbid or not turbid. So it's not the color, but it's referring to like the opacity of the water, how clear the water is. Clear would be like a nice clean fish tank or something like that. Slightly turbid is going to be kind of a little difficult to see through, and turbid is going to be much harder to see through, almost not at all. This thing has a funny name. It's called a Secchi disc. SECCHI. But what we do is you put that in the water and you see how much of the white and black and the differentiation, and can you tell what's white and what's black and how white is the white. You'll see clear, looks clear, somewhat turbid. In Bound Brook, that's my hometown, so anyone in that area, you might know the stream. And then turbid, you can't see anything. You're probably not going to be able to see your boots. It's not necessarily true that this one is cleaner or dirtier than the other, and that's something you need to keep in mind as you move forward with the assessments. The assessment might score low for some categories, and it might score high for other categories. So at the end, this is a compilation of all of your observations. It's not just, oh, well, John and Kayla went to the stream, it was turbid and there was some litter, so it must be polluted and it has to be saved. It's not necessarily true. So keep that in mind. Don't get don't get put off if you have a couple low scores, because at the end, you add the scores up, you take everything into consideration. Me, myself, Heather, the board, a whole bunch of people base those decisions off of that. It's not just one of these things. You could be in a clear stream that's polluted, and you can be in a turbid stream that is a category 1 trout production clean water in the state. So, don't let those things get you off put. Surface coating, kind of self-explanatory. We're going to go over them a little bit. You might have none. That is no surface coating and just see water and maybe some leaves floating around. Oily, which this picture you can see on the right-hand side of this picture, it's none. And then on the left-hand side of this picture, there's some sheen of oil. It's not, once again, not necessarily true that this is pollution. One kind of like folktale or homegrown or grassroots way of checking it, if you break up that oil, if you see an oily surface on the water and you break it up with a stick or your, let's just say a stick, and it like kind of breaks up and floats away in a different way, it's a possibility that that coating is actually somehow an organic oily sheen. If you break it up and it breaks up and it goes right back to itself, there's a good chance that that is a synthetic or some sort of petroleum product. But once again, don't be off put if you see some oily sheen in there. Foam can be from soap and detergents. It can also be nitrogen getting like smushed up and chopped up and mixed with air and water in one of the riffles that I talked about before. And you might have a foamy situation. Scum could be algae. It could be from anaerobic activity in the water. So, list all these things in your presentation. Stream flow. Now, this is going to depend on the stream you're looking at. It's going to depend on if it's raining that day or the day before. It's going to depend if you go monitoring for some reason, you missed your date in May and June, and now you're out in August and there's no water. It's all dried up and the golf course sucked all the water up. Who knows? But once again, this is a little bit depends on your perspective. So I'm going to go through these. I know you're not supposed to read off the slides, but we're going to go through them one by one, just so we are all on the same page. We're looking at the velocity on the top of the stream. You obviously can't tell what's going on underneath, and that's going to depend too. If you're looking at a 10-foot deep segment versus a 10-inch deep segment, there's going to be different things going on below the surface. Slow means, okay, I just saw a chat pop up really quick, but it went away, and I think it mentions foam or scum. So if Heather or somebody wants to get that to me in a different way, I would love to answer that. But
so, John, the question is, you mentioned foam can be due to nitrogen. Is that eutrophication, and is it possibly due to too much fertilizer?
Yeah, it could. Well, that's the thing. This is a situation where it's not like I went to a stream, I saw scum or I saw foam, and it must be polluted because there's the farm upstream and this and that. Now, let's say, for example, the farm upstream is following the regulations and they put just the proper amount of fertilizer. It all gets soaked into the soil and nothing gets washed off. However, there's like a fish mating going on upstream, and there's lots of stuff in the water and getting mixed around. It can be nitrogen from natural sources also. So yes to your question, it is possible it could be from fertilizer, and also no to the question, it can be from not just natural sources like a goose, which is considered a pollution as well, but it could be from fish. It could be some fish kill, or there's dead fish getting kind of like chopped. It sounds gross, sorry, but you asked. Getting chopped up and smushed around and bashed on the rocks, and then that water kind of might find an eddy and a little circular motion and kind of create foam. So, you know, like all of these things that we're going to be looking at, there's not just two sides to the coin. It's like a D20. I don't know if anyone plays D&D or anything, but there's all different possibilities that you might come across. If that didn't answer the question, or if it's still unclear, hit up the chat and then we'll go further from there. But I hope it did, because that was eye-opening to me, because I would, you know, you go to see a stream, you see oil on the stream, you're like, this thing must be polluted, this is disgusting. Oh, it's actually, okay, answer the question. Thanks, Keisha. So, you know, it's a learning curve for a lot of this stuff. Moderate stream flow means that things are kind of moving, but, you know, they're not really booking it. You have a mix. Swift, the water's moving fast. Combination, you have a variety of stream flows, and we're going to see that in a second. You have something on the left. You'll see these in a lot of municipal and county parks where they cut the grass just up. It is technically a buffer. It is better than cutting the grass right up to the edge, but it does usually create these kind of slow streams. If anyone's familiar with Johnson's Park, I hope some people are, or I'm sure some people are on the call. There's a few tributaries that go to the Raritan River through Johnson's Park. And Swift, I don't have a pointer right here, but on the top of the picture, you see it's kind of slow. It picks up a little bit of speed, and then once it's between these rocks, you can kind of see in the picture there's that white, most likely that's bubbles, and that's a riffle or a run. The water's going faster. That would be Swift. It could almost be a combination if you look at the whole stretch. Once again, you'll see another picture. You see this a lot, a natural kind of dam or a man-made dam, or maybe a sewer line going through the bottom of the stream, which we see all over the place. You have the slower water above it, and once it goes down, it picks up some speed and becomes Swift. The reason we're looking for this is there's just different factors. There's different things that are going to be going on underneath the water based on what the water is doing. And I think there's a picture. Oh, it's not me. Okay, so what we're going to, wait, is this you, Caitlin, or is this me?
This is me.
Okay, over to Caitlin.
Sweet. So now that was all the things that you're just kind of looking at the stream and looking to basically just pick out the things that I'm seeing. So this involves actually getting into the stream. So you're going to want to wear boots, depending on the depth of the stream. If you do have waders, waders are, you can see sort of in the picture, it's a little bit blurry, but waders are basically the full length boots, like what you see fishermen wearing, where the boots are connected to your overalls, basically. So they're basically just a giant boots that keep you dry. If you do have access to waders, they definitely do well to keep you dry, but you're going to want to get in the stream to take the width of the stream. Typically, we'll use if you can see the picture on the left, that rolly tape. I don't know the proper name. I think it's just a measuring tape. But we have both 50-meter measuring tapes and 100-meter long measuring tapes that you can take out, and you basically just measure the width of the stream. You want to measure from where the water touches the bank on one side to where the water touches the bank on the other side. So you want that full stream length. You don't want to necessarily measure from bank to bank, because if the water doesn't fill the stream all the way, you want to measure where the actual water in that stream, how wide that water is, if that makes sense. And then you also want to measure the depth. Both of these things you measure in meters. So you can use your meter stick. You can see the picture on the right. And you do each of these measurements 5 times. For width, you measure 5 times down the stream about every 20 meters. So you want to measure width, you walk 20 meters downstream, you measure width again, you walk 20 meters downstream, you measure width again, you do that 5 times. And then you take the average of those 5 width measurements every 20 meters, you take the average, and that's your final width, which you put on the far right of your data sheet. For depth, again, you're measuring depth 5 times, and you're going to take the average. But for depth, you don't measure downstream, you measure across 5 times. So you can see us taking the width of the stream. So basically we would be taking depth once in the middle, once on each side, and then once partway down the stream. If that doesn't make sense, I can pull up a diagram later of how you measure width and depth. So if anyone's confused about that, let me know and we can explain it a little bit more thoroughly. But width you measure every 20 meters, depth you measure 5 times in one cross section of the stream. Velocity, again, you're going to be doing this 5 times and then taking the average time in seconds. So you are going to stand 10 feet apart from a partner. One of you is standing upstream and one of you is standing downstream. Then you're going to have your little rubber, we use a rubber ducky just to float down the stream. So you take your rubber ducky, you drop it just behind you, and you start the timer when it passes you. So you're not dropping it right next to you at the start of your 10 feet. You're actually dropping it slightly behind you so that it can kind of pick up the momentum of the stream and pass you at the velocity of the stream, if that makes sense. And again, if anyone has any questions or wants a more visual example, they can always ask me later. If you could go back for just one more second. So actually, I think that was it. You start the timer when it passes you, and then you stop it once your partner, who is standing 10 feet apart from you, you stop the timer right when they catch the duck. So you're basically timing how long does this duck take to go 10 feet. You do that 5 times, and then you take that average in seconds. You're going to then convert that seconds to meters per second, and you can I just Google it because I'm terrible with math. I just say, okay, 10 feet per second. Please Google, please convert this to meters per second, and it does it very easily. But if you want the more complicated math, we can also give you that math. But I just Google it if you have access. Again, if you have access to internet and access to Google, that's the easiest way for me to do it. But again, each of these measurements you do 5 times. You take the average, and then you do any conversions that you need to do as necessary. Okay, that's it for stream. And then back to you, John.
Okay, so we're back to me for stream characteristics, and this is stuff that you have seen your entire life, but not necessarily put it into terms of woody debris, algae growth, predominant aquatic vegetation, structures. But these are things that if anyone's grown up around here, or I'm sure in other states, you spend time in the woods and you spend time in the streams and you spend time turning over rocks and finding crayfish and just kind of understanding how it all works, and not necessarily out there with a clipboard comparing, oh, is it 25% canopy or is it more 50% canopy cover? So kind of think back to those days. There's one analogy I like to use. I was doing a program once with students and adults, and one of the students found a crayfish, and a father who was there was kind of like losing his mind. He's like, I can't believe there's crayfish. I can't believe they still have crayfish, is what he said. And I said, where do you think they went? You don't spend any time in the river looking for bugs and crayfish anymore. So this is kind of like a time to maybe think back on those times. It's scientific, it's civic science. These results will lead to actual changes in the watershed over time, but it's also an opportunity to have fun. It's another reason it's fun to go out with a partner or a team. But like, think about those times as well, and enjoy your half hour, 40 minutes, or however long it takes you to do your assessment. Enjoy your time out there. So canopy we'll go over first. Now, like I said, take these things individually. Don't just look at one thing and say, well, this stream is beat up. The canopy must be bad. The stream bank is bad. There's dirt. There's litter around. Somebody is, I think, has their mic on. Somebody who just called in. If you want to mute that real quick, unless you had a question, which I will gladly take. But take them individually, and like, because once you open that page, you see that all those columns and rows and charts and numbers and percentages, and you kind of like your eyes go a little wide. But we're going to start with canopy. So open means that 0 to 25% of the canopy is open, meaning that you can almost look right up to the sky. And mostly closed or closed is going to be like the picture on the left. I mean, that's probably 90% closed. Another way, which is almost a little counterintuitive, but makes a lot of sense, is you can look down at the stream. If you see a lot of sun peeking through, you have an open canopy. If you see mostly shades and shadows and a couple little outlines of sunny leaves on the stream, you have a more closed canopy. So this is a perfect example. It's kind of, if you look at the picture on the left in the green brook, would you consider that one more open or more closed compared to the Ireland brook on the right? If you want to type it in the chat, feel free, because I will see them pop up. So I'll get an idea if everybody understands this right away or if it's a little more conceptual. So do you think that the green brook or the Ireland brook is more closed? Give everybody a few seconds. Greenbrook, okay. One vote for Greenbrook for more closed. And another one for Greenbrook, okay. Anybody feel like the Ireland brook is more? Oh, another one for Greenbrook. Okay, so you understand this one. All right, I'm not going to keep going over it, but you understand it. If anyone doesn't understand it, you get all of our emails at the end, and you can email me or text me, whatever. But the reasoning is that all of these things add to the health of the stream. If you have a more covered canopy, you have cooler water, you have more opportunities for bugs, birds, and critters to enjoy the water, live in it, and create what's considered a healthier ecosystem versus the sun beating down on there, warming everything up, and lowering the quality of life for the organisms that might be in there. Woody debris is a fancy word for sticks and tree trunks and branches and stuff like that. So like on the bottom here, looking for twigs and logs in the stream or hanging onto the stream, where there's a few different categories that we're looking for. Right now, we're only looking for, is there woody debris? Later on, it'll be different types of woody debris and where is it and everything like that. But we're just looking for it. Is it abundant? Like on the left, you have logs and sticks. And once again, counterintuitively, a lot of people will think that if there's sticks and logs in the stream, it can't be good, right? Because the river is made of water and sticks and logs get in the way of the water. However, it creates all these nooks and crannies for critters and crayfish and raccoons and bobcats and all animals to use that system. That bridge on the left in the McGellards Brook, it's a log. It's considered a natural bridge. It's a way for animals to get across from one to the other. So there's a lot of benefits to the woody debris. We're looking for abundant, moderate, scarce, or none. Those are kind of self-explanatory, but we do have some pictures as well. You're going to see on the left, McGeller's Brook, tons of, I mean, I would write abundant plus, plus, plus. I wouldn't actually, but in my head, that's what I would say. Bound Brook, moderate. You know, you don't have it all over the place, but you have kind of like a jam up on the right here, and that's going to break up and float downstream eventually too. That's definitely not scarce, and it's definitely not none. Once again, predominant aquatic vegetation. It means water plants, things that you might have already seen if you've ever been on a raft or a kayak, or you're just in the river standing on your own and you feel something go against your leg and you go, oh gosh, what the heck was that? It might have been some of this rooted submergent plants. So if you don't know any of these words, feel free to ask me. But basically, we're looking at things that are rooted or free floating. And then if they're rooted, are they emergent, meaning coming out through the surface, emerging through the surface of the water, or are they submergent, under the water, submerged under the water surface? So on the left, it looks like we have some cattails. I can't exactly tell. Rooted emergent, it's emerging through the top of the water. That's really easy to tell. Rooted submergent, a little harder because you might not be able to see it at first. And free floating, like all this stuff, free floating on the top of the surface. Another cool one is rooted and floating. You don't see a whole ton of these, but you will find these in the Lower Raritan. You'll find lily pads and things like that. So they have roots on the bottom, but they're floating. So they're kind of a mix of the two other ones that you're going to see a lot more of. The next thing is algae growth. First off, we're looking, is it abundant, moderate, scarce, or none? And you have to use your objective lens a little bit. None is an easy one because if you don't see any, there's none. If you see a whole ton all throughout, it's abundant. And then in the middle, you have scarce or moderate. We don't have a percentage of that, and we don't have X amount of algae equals moderate or scarce. But once you see a few pictures, once you talk to a few people, and once you get out a few different times, especially if you decide to adopt the stream or go out with some stream keepers that have been going to sites before, you'll get an idea of what is kind of the norm for the area. But what we're also looking for, besides the fact that is there algae there, abundant, scarce, moderate, or none, what type of algae it is, because you could have invasive algae, you could have beneficial algae, all these different things. So you have filamentous, which is a new word to a lot of people. It's a new word to me when I learned this, but it has filaments. It's kind of long and almost furry looking. If anyone has seen it before, you know what I'm talking about. But when you see it in the water, it kind of has a lot of movement to it. It looks like it could be a fish swimming, or it looks kind of hairy. Periphyton is the other one, and it's super slippery. We even put a warning, watch out, it's slippery. But it kind of covers the rocks. That's a little more common. This is what people have usually think of when they think of algae. They'll think of this periphyton. Someone said beautiful filamentous. Yeah, it is kind of beautiful. When you when you're out there too, you'll see it kind of flowing, and it's sort of meditative. The periphyton is beautiful in its own way, sure, but it doesn't have the same movement, and it's easy to identify. Litter concentration, once again, is there litter? Is it absent, right? If you see one water bottle, can you circle present? Yeah, sure. I mean, make a note how much. If you find one water bottle. If you find a whole ton of stuff, obviously you're going to circle present, versus if you see nothing, you're going to circle absent. And then if present, a percentage of, you know, how much of the area is covered in litter. Caitlin gave you an idea right here. Think of the shore bank as a grid, and like how much of it is littery, which I do not think is a word. I don't swim in water with periphyton. It just looks gross. Yeah, it kind of does, and it's super slippery unless you have some sort of water shoes. But it's not necessarily a hazard to your health, but it does have a sliminess to it. I'm going to go back. The nice thing about these assessments, it's not only one thing or the other. It's not like this is only going to water quality, it's only going to this. This actually helps us come up with partnership projects. For example, is this an area that could benefit from some streamside restoration? Is this an area that could be benefit from a cleanup? Is there something in the area, a business, a school, a community group that's nearby that might be unknowingly participating in some of this negative stuff that can also help us do a cleanup. So structures, once again, kind of self-explanatory. However, some of these things you've never called them before. Like I know a lot of people who have never called a culvert in New Jersey. I think I used to just think it was some sort of bridge. But what we're looking for is, are there dams in the area? Is there a bridge? If so, where is it? Once you get to the site sketch, you can draw it in there. These all have an effect on the water quality, the things and organisms that live in the water, live around the water, and use the water for consumption, for recreation, for all different sorts of things. So culvert, there's an example of one on the left. It's a pipe. There's different types of culverts. There's box culverts, round culverts, open bottom culverts, closed bottom culverts. You don't have to get into that, but if you go spend enough time in this like me, you'll know the difference. Dams and bridges, we know what those are. Land use characteristics, this is on your sheet, and you can check off as many of these things as you deem fit. I don't know, we don't have like the exact sign, so don't go onto Google Maps later on and say, oh, there was a pasture a quarter mile over that I didn't realize. Use this guideline on the bottom here. While standing at the stream, look around and check off the things that you can see within the area. And also, use your discretion. One of the important ones that we're looking for, sounds good. One of the important ones that we're looking for is waterfowl. I used to know it a little bit better, but I believe that one adult goose can poop something like 20 pounds in a week. They can live for about 13 years, and you do the math, it's like thousands of pounds of poop for one Canada goose. So that's another important one to put on there. But I think I stole Caitlin's thunder, so I'm turning it over to her.
Yeah, basically one of the things that we definitely want to look for with waterfowl is the number of waterfowl. And again, this is kind of alluding to what John was saying is it's important that we know present or absent, but also how many are actually there. So if you do check off waterfowl, that's why there's a little star next to waterfowl. The star is just so you remember to check off the approximate number that you see. And sometimes there's quite a large flock, so do your best, but definitely mark down how many you're seeing, and mark them down as you see them as well, because they are mobile, so they do fly away. So that's something to think about when you first get to a stream as well, is do you see ducks? And waterfowl is just a very fancy way of saying ducks, basically. So that's something to think about when you first get to your stream, and be aware of, is looking at your surroundings and looking for the things that are there that might not be there by the time you get to the land use characteristics part of the stream assessment. So the next slide is going to describe the site sketch. So the site sketch is basically, as it says, is a detailed map of the stream reach. So there's a lot of different things that you should include in your site sketch, but basically you should just draw what you see. So this is none of my stream sketches have ever looked this nice. This is a very nice stream sketch. If you go to the next slide, it shows a picture of a stream. So I looked at this picture of a stream. I assessed it. I found there's a bridge in there, a fallen log, there's some riffles. So if you go to the next slide, this is my stream sketch. So this is typically what mine look like. The things that you should definitely include, the access points where you are actually getting into the stream from either the road or wherever. You should include, obviously, the bridges. If you see a pipe, you should draw the pipe. If it is a bridge, you need to say if it's what the bridge is for. So this bridge is a road, so I put road next to the bridge. If it's just a bridge for walking, then you would put walking path instead of road. If it's a train, then you would put train tracks. So it's important that we know that there's a bridge there, but also what is going over the bridge, if it's humans, cars, or trains. So make sure you denote what the bridge is for. You should put on this stream, it was trees. If there weren't trees there, you could put open pasture or manicured lawn, or basically just a mowed lawn. So you should put the type of
shrubbery or what you're seeing on the sides of the stream banks. You should also put the flow. Flow is the direction that the stream is flowing. So you should use an arrow to indicate the direction. You should also note where the riffles are, which is those little rapids. I think of riffles as mini rapids because the R riffle, R rapid. So you should put where the riffles are. If there are pools, you should put where the pools are, and then any significant woody debris. So for example, there was that fallen log, so I wrote where the fallen log was. If there was a large pack of leaves or a large pack of trees or shrubs, I would put that, I would circle that on the stream, on the site sketch. So basically anything that you see that you've marked down in the assessment, you should put into your site sketch, but it does not need to be horribly elaborate. This took me about a minute or 2 minutes to really put together. It took me a little bit longer because I was working with PowerPoint, and if I was drawing it would be a lot quicker. But yeah, basically all of the really important things are riffles, the access point, the direction of the stream, and major landmarks like bridges and that kind of stuff, and pipes. Those are definitely the things that you should be marking down. So yeah, now we're going to take a break. We're going to do a little bit of a 7th inning stretch. We're going to do a 5-minute break. So my watch says 10:12. So if everyone comes back by 10:17, and if you can get up and walk around and everything, just make sure to come back. And if you decide to stay, you can look at this lovely picture of a turtle that was from a actual stream site in the Lower Raritan. So this is just another pool to get it to come out and assess some streams, because you might see some really cool wildlife like this turtle. So yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break. Just come back in like 5 minutes or so. We'll start up again at like 10:17 or so.
John, maybe you can go back to the image of Ireland Brook. And if folks want to try their hand at doing a site sketch in the next couple minutes, if they don't want to get up and leave their computer, that they can put pen or pencil to paper and sketch this out. Caitlin, are you ready to jump back in?
I am.
Awesome.
I was actually making a little diagram of how to take stream widths because it's a little bit because it was a little unclear. But yeah, we're ready to jump back in if everybody is back. So if John could switch to the next slide. Awesome. So now the next part of this is going to be a little bit more technical, and it's going to we're going to need to use a little bit of judgment here. Whereas before, a lot of the stuff that we were assessing was just, is it present or is it not present, and describing what is present. We're going to start grading the stream. So basically on your monitoring sheet, you have 10 habitat parameters. And for each of these parameters, you need to grade the stream from 0 to 20. Based on that score between 0 and 20, we basically assess whether the stream is optimal, suboptimal, marginal, or poor. Optimal is the best. It means that the parameter is the healthiest that it can be. Poor means the unhealthiest in our scale. So 20 means optimal, and 0 is the other end of the spectrum. That's the poor end of the spectrum. So we're going to go through each of the 10 parameters in turn and talk a little bit about what it means and how to assess if it's optimal, suboptimal, marginal, or poor. So if you go to the next slide.
Folks should pull out their high gradient assessment, stream assessment tool right now. Everyone should have received an email with a bunch of attachments, and right now we're going to be working through the high gradient assessment sheet.
Yeah. So we'll start talking about it while people are getting it pulled up. We'll go through them relatively slowly. So basically what we'll do is we'll read through what optimal means, and then we'll talk in a little bit of detail about what it means to not be optimal, if that makes sense. So the first thing is epifaunal substrate and available cover. So epifaunal substrate and available cover is just a really fancy way of saying habitat in the stream. So again, for all of these habitat parameters, or for all of these pieces of the stream that we're looking at, we're thinking from the perspective of a bug. So thinking of a little critter who's living in the water, it wants to be able to breathe, it wants to be able to eat, and it wants to be able to live safely. So an optimal stream in terms of habitat availability, or what the environment that it can live in, which is that epifaunal substrate and available cover, we're looking for greater than 70% of the substrate, or the stuff at the bottom of the stream. Greater than 70% of it is favorable for epifaunal colonization, which basically means the bugs to live in. Epifaunal colonization is just a really fancy way of saying the things that are living in the stream can live well in the habitat that exists in the bottom of the stream. And also fish cover. So we also want to think about the fish. We want to see a mix of snags, submerged logs, undercut banks, cobble, and other stable habitat. And at the stage to allow full colonization potential, which basically means that it shouldn't be new stuff falling into the stream. It should be established habitat. It should have been there for a little while. So you can see some pictures of the different types of streams that we're looking for, or the different types of stream habitat that we're looking for. You see a picture of snags, which is all of that fallen twigs, which creates a collection area for bugs to be able to live. We see submerged logs, where the bugs can live on the bottom of the logs. Undercut banks is where the bank is kind of shaped, it's kind of curved, where the water can go under the bank, and there's it's like an overhang along the side of the stream. So you want to see that type of habitat. We want to see those undercut banks be filled with water, so that bugs can live in that underneath that bank. And we also want to see riffles. So we've been talking about riffles a lot. So here's a great picture of them. We want to see these little rapids. The rapids are, again, they're really, really important for getting oxygen into the water because the water is turning over. And they provide really great habitat for that reason for bugs. They're very
the bugs can live in the rocks that create the riffles and can breathe really well because there's so much oxygen getting into the stream. So an optimal habitat has greater than 70% of the substrate on the bottom of the stream is favorable. So it has all of these elements. It has the snags, and it has the riffles, and it has the undercut banks and the logs. When we go to suboptimal is when we start to see a decreasing percentage of that favorable habitat, where only 40 to 70% is a mix of that stable habitat. There is some new fall where some of these logs have just fallen but have not been in the stream for very long. But really the indicator is that 40 to 70% of the habitat is favorable rather than greater than 70%. And you might be missing one of these types of habitat. So that would put it into suboptimal. When we go down to marginal is when we see even less of a percentage of stable habitat. We only see 20 to 40%. And the habitat in general is less desirable, and it may be unstable. We may have snags that are just getting rushed away. They're not staying. Those logs and those twigs aren't staying in that one place to allow the bugs to happily colonize. And poor is when we have less than 20% stable habitat, and it's obvious that there is just not substrate there. There's not habitat there for the bugs to live. So that's kind of that. Again, everything is on a scale. So you could have high optimal, you could have low optimal, and it's kind of all based off of your judgment. And the more that you go out and the more that you see these habitats, the greater you'll be able to assess and use your judgment. So embeddedness is basically a really fancy way of saying how buried are the rocks in the bottom of the stream. How embedded are these rocks into the sediment or into the dirt at the bottom of the stream. So we're talking about a range of embeddedness. So optimal means that the gravel, the cobble, the boulder particles, all of those rocks at the bottom are only 0 to 25% surrounded by fine sediment. And that layering of cobble is going to provide diversity of niche space. There's a lot of areas and a lot of rock surface cover for bugs to live in. So you can see a really good picture of that 0 to 25% cover. There's not much sediment surrounding these rocks. It's mostly rock that you're seeing at the bottom of the stream. When we go down to suboptimal is when the boulder particles are 25 to 50% surrounded by fine sediment. So you see in this second picture, the rocks are starting to be a little bit surrounded, but it's still majority rock space for the bugs to live. When you go down to marginal is when they are 50 to 75% surrounded by fine sediment. Again, you can see the picture here. And when you're poor, that means that they're greater than 75% surrounded by fine sediment, where most of the bottom is dirt. There's not as much rock. And again, that's less favorable for the bugs to live in because they prefer the rock to the sediment, which is why it's considered poor habitat. So when you're going into the stream, you're looking at the rocks, you're looking at how surrounded they are by sediment and going off of that to grade from optimal to poor. And here's some actual pictures of a stream. The top left is bedrock. These large rock sheets is considered bedrock. So you would mark that as there's not as much sediment surrounding the rock. So that would be more optimal. And then you see in this top right picture how it's mostly rock. You're not seeing as much sediment. There's a range of rock sizes, and most of them are basically layered on top of more rock rather than surrounded by sediment. Then on the bottom right picture, you're starting to see that 26 to 50%, where you do see sediment starting to creep in between these rocks, and then greater than 75% is when it's majority dirt. And those rocks are heavily embedded, or they're buried. That's another way to think about it, is how buried are the rocks in the soil. Velocity depth combinations. So this is where assessing how fast the stream is flowing and assessing how wide the stream is earlier, this will come in handy. We're basically looking for all 4 velocity depth regimes or combinations. We want to see slow deep, we want to see slow shallow, we want to see fast deep, and we want to see fast shallow. This is a relatively easier one to grade because you basically go down a category based off of how many you're missing. So if only 3 of the 4 combinations are present, you mark it into suboptimal. And it's important to note that if we're missing fast shallow, which is what you're seeing a lot of here, especially on the bottom half of this picture, that really fast and shallow moving water, if you're missing fast shallow, you score it even lower because that's really important for the bugs. Marginal is only 2 of the 4 habitat regimes, and poor is when you only see 1. And if you go to the next slide, it has a little bit more of a clear definition. Fast is when you can actually see the surface of the water moving. That is considered fast. And deep if it's about above your shins. And if it's fast deep, you should feel a tug of the water when you're trying to walk through it, but you should still be able to walk through it. Don't ever go into a stream that it's so fast you feel like you're going to fall over. That's just for basic safety reasons. Sediment deposition, this is related to embeddedness or how buried the rocks are, but also can be scored differently. So basically, sediment deposition is talking about the amount of sediment or the amount of dirt that's present on the bottom or deposited on the bottom of the stream. So it's basically just how much dirt is on the bottom. So for optimal, we're looking for little or no enlargement of islands or point bars, and less than 5% of the bottom is affected by sediment deposition. So point bars, you can see a diagram of what a point bar is on the left. A point bar basically exists on the opposite side of a cut bank. So the stream curves and cuts away at the soil on one side and deposits that soil on the other side. So you can pretty clearly see where you would be looking for point bars based off of how the stream is curved in this diagram. Islands is an island in the middle of the stream. So we want to see little or no enlargement of these islands, and we want to see less than 5% of the bottom covered in dirt, basically. As you go down, you're basically scoring it based off of how much of an increase there is in these point bars and in these islands. If you're seeing some new increase in bar formation, that is a sign that it's a less optimal stream. And if a greater percentage of the bottom is affected by deposition, which again is that fresh dirt being placed onto the bottom of the stream, that's what you mark down from optimal. And then again, marginal, you just keep going down to marginal and poor based off of how much dirt's on the bottom that is fresh dirt on there, and how much the islands are actually increasing over time. Channel flow status, this is basically how full the stream is. So if you go to the next slide, it'll show a good picture. This one again is a fairly, it's a bit more objective. You're basically just seeing how full is the stream. So if the water reaches the base of both lower banks and there's a minimal amount of that channel substrate or that bottom of the stream exposed, that is an optimal stream. If it only fills greater than 75% of the channel and 25% or less of the channel substrate is exposed, that's suboptimal, and so on and so forth. So if you skip to the next slide, this stream is not all the way filled. It reaches the base of the right bank, but it does not reach the base of the left bank. That you can tell that the stream, it's supposed to be stream substrate because it is damp soil and there's no vegetation growing there. So clearly this part of the stream is normally underwater, but it's not underwater yet. So it does not reach the base of both lower banks, but I would say that it does fill greater than 75% of the stream channel. So I would mark this somewhere in suboptimal. I'm passing it on to John.
Okie doke. This is a great spot for me to start because I did this slide. I realized that it's 10:31, so I'm not going to be rushing through these, but if I miss anything or something's unclear, feel free to put it in the chat, and hopefully at 11 we have some time to get to questions. Channel alteration.
Joan, let me just jump in. We need to get to questions before 11. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yep.
Okay. So some of the folks have a hard stop at 11, and we want to. Okay, great.
Yep. So channel alteration, you're looking for presence of the channel of the river being altered. Is there any existence of it, like we'll just start with optimal. Channelization or dredging absent or minimal, meaning when you walk up to that stream, it looks like the stream might have looked 1,000 years ago. And then as you go down, how much of it is altered? Is there riprap? Is there concrete? Is there stones? Is there dams and stuff like that? As you see in this picture, then 0 to 20. There you go. Perfect example right here. Okay, so we have frequency of riffles. Now, this is one that you're going to need to read the paragraph like a few times and kind of see it in real life. But you're looking for the presence of riffles. Riffles is that bubbly water where there's oxygen getting put into the river, which is healthy for all the organisms that live underwater. So is there 5 to 7 times the amount of, well, that's a weird way to put it. So you're looking for the frequency of riffles and the distance between riffles across the width. Is it 5 to 7 times? Is it 7 to 15 times the width? 15 to 25 times, meaning how far are these riffles between each other? Using the width of the river as like a segment going upstream. I'm using my hands a lot here, and I realize nobody can see that, so that's not useful. But do we get to see the past data for comparison? Oh, okay. There's a chat question that went away, and oh, you can see me? Oh, this is great. Okay. This whole time I've been thinking I've been just leaning back. Okay, so there was a question I saw pop up and it went away, and please hold that to the end because then we can go over it. I can't see it anymore. Once again, this is why they're here and why they're important. Like I said,
the question is, do we get to see past data for comparison to the current data that is collected? And the answer to that is we provide the baseline data for folks to see. And it absolutely depends on how quickly we can do data entry for interim years so that folks can see change over time. So let me just say that the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership is 100% volunteer. That is, we are board run. All of our data gathering is done by volunteers, and all of our data entry is done by volunteers too. So there are lots of opportunities for contributing, for stewardship, that if folks don't want to go out into the field, they can also volunteer to do some of that data entry, which then will allow everyone to see the past data for the comparison, like what Ms. Stephen was asking for.
Great. Bank stability, the way that we score them is if you're standing in the river and you look upstream as if the water is flowing and hitting the front of you, the right side where your right hand is the right bank, and the left side where your left hand is. The reason I explain it like that is a lot of times river right and river left, if you're a kayaker or even do monitoring with other organizations, it might be switched. And you're going to grade these separately. And this is a good example of be objective. You might have a 10 on the one side and you might have a 0 like this bottom picture on the other side. So, don't score one side lower. You're only scoring each row at a time, going column to column. These pictures are really good examples of really bad erosion. They would all be in the poor section, I would say. Bank vegetative protection. Once again, you're doing left bank, right bank. You will see this a lot, especially in the Lower Raritan, especially in the more, I also did Union County, a lot of sampling there. You might have the one side will be a 10. You'll have more than 90% of the stream bank has native vegetation, there's trees, there's understory, there's shrubs, there's all this stuff. And the left side might be completely channelized, poured concrete, the back of a shopping center. So there you have to look at each one individually. So, the question is, what vegetation do you see on the bank? I'm just going to skip forward to it because some people might be answering what species of trees and stuff like that. But you see trees, you see some shrubs, you're missing understory. So you want to make sure that once you're reading these paragraphs a few times and you get kind of comfortable with what you're looking for when you're scoring bank vegetative protection, that's what you're looking for. There's different schools of thought, I believe. Some people say, hey, it's better to have some vegetation on the bank than others. And some people will say, well, if it's not native vegetation, it doesn't count. But we are counting the vegetation and obviously native is going to be a 10, but we don't expect you to know the difference between Japanese barberry and some healthy native plants. So don't worry about that just yet. We do have some pictures coming up though. Understory is the lower level. We don't see a ton of that sometimes because of deer browsing and things like that. So same thing, you have all these invasives, you may know them or you may not know them. You can also take pictures, you can also take notes, you can also do drawings if you're unsure of something, and hopefully one of us can help point you in the right direction. Number 10, riparian vegetative zone. Riparian is this basically the sides or the edges of the stream. You also might hear me say buffer instead of zone, riparian buffer. So is it wider than 18 meters? And once again, you're going to look on the left and you're going to look on the right. If you don't know exactly what 18 meters is, you have the surveyor's measuring tape with you. Feel free to get out there and measure if you want to be more specific. Is it 12 to 18 meters, 6 to 12, or is it less than 6 meters? I would say obviously, but it might not be obvious. The wider bank that you have that's vegetative, the healthier, the better chance of it being healthier water quality. If you have a parking lot right next to the stream, stuff from the parking lot is going to get washed right into the stream. If you have a parking lot with a 60-foot buffer of trees to the stream, you're going to have these plants and the root structures pulling a lot of this organic compounds from the parking lot, and it's not going to make it to the water. A perfect example. You have the parking lot backing right up. Anytime it rains, that's dumping right into the river. And same thing. Now, there is a vegetative buffer, but it's just grass. And if anyone's ever been outdoors when it's been a heavy rain, that water will go across the grass almost as if it's in a parking lot, because those roots are only an inch, 2 inches deep, maybe. They can only soak up so much. It's not as if there's cool and warm weather, tall native grasses there that have roots 3 to 4 feet deep and even deeper in some cases. So this is why a vegetative buffer is important. I feel like I kind of hit it up as we were going along, but it's a filter, not just for the air. Everyone thinks, oh, trees are good for air quality. It filters the water, it holds the soil, it creates an entire healthy ecosystem. And I believe it's Caitlin, but I could be wrong.
So if you want to go to the next slide, again, so then basically this is just how you add up the scores, which is just adding up the scores that you've given for all of those 10 habitat parameters. And then based off of how high or how low that number is, we can say if that is in general an optimal, suboptimal, marginal, or poor stream. So that number is what we really want for, as far as data input. So the next slide, again, if you remember, there are 2 different types of streams that are in the Lower Raritan, and the LRWP does assess both types. So we just went over all of the habitat parameters for the high gradient or the rocky bottom stream. So now we're going to go over which ones are different for that low gradient or muddy bottom or soft bottom. All of those mean the same thing, stream. So the 3 different parameters are pool substrate, the pool variability, and sinuosity, which is how much it meanders, how curvy the stream is. So the next slide is talking about pool substrate characterization. And again, the reason that it's called a muddy bottom is because it has a muddy bottom. It has a different substrate than the high gradient stream, so you have to assess it differently. An optimal stream is a mixture of substrate materials with some gravel and firm sand prevalent, and you have a lot of root mats and a lot of submerged vegetation. So here's some pictures of all of those 3 things. So if they're very prevalent, that is optimal. And as you lose those things, you go down into the suboptimal, marginal, and poor categories. The next slide shows pool variability. So like we had those different, this one's kind of like the 4 different types of how fast and how deep the stream is. Like we want to see slow deep, slow deep, fast deep, all that kind of stuff. For muddy bottom streams, we want to see an even mix of large, shallow, large, deep, small, shallow, and small, deep pools present, because we're kind of assuming that the whole stream isn't moving that fast in the first place. So we want to see large, shallow, large, deep, small, shallow, small, shallow, and small, deep. I just noticed that typo now. We want to see all four. And as you lose a type, you get knocked down a category. So the next slide again defines deep is greater than 1 meter typically. And if it's greater than 1 meter, you really shouldn't walk. That's starting to get to the point where it's a little bit too deep to be considered safe to walk through. And large is basically the width of the stream, or at least greater than half of the width of the stream. So that would be considered a large pool. And then the final thing that's different between the high and the low gradient is channel sinuosity. A sinuous stream has a lot of curves and bends. So this picture is of a very sinuous stream. So again, this involves some really weird math, but again, you kind of get used to looking at how windy a stream is and being able to determine if it's optimal or if it's on the other end, if it's poor. Basically, you want to see if you were to take the stream and to stretch it out as if you were taking a string and stretching it out. A optimal stream, if you stretched it out, the bends would, when you stretch it out into a straight line, it would be 3 to 4 times the length of what that original length was when you stretch it out into a straight line. And you go down a category based off of if it's only 2 to 3 times that length when you stretch it out, if it's only 1 to 2 times, or if it's just straight in the first place. And stretching it out would make no difference because it already is very channelized and very straight. So that is channel sinuosity. So I think John's doing safety.
Yeah, sure. And a lot of this is official stuff, and this is also going to be from example, because besides the monitoring, I also spend a lot of time standing in the rivers fishing. So a lot of this safety stuff is kind of the same stuff. So always monitor with at least one person. That's not an option. And that's not just so in case you get lost or something. There's a lot of different things that could potentially go wrong. There's also a lot of things that having another person is just necessary for. You can't do the measurements without a second person. You can't do the rubber duck test without a second person. And it's also nice to talk through some of the observations with a second person. Sometimes, you might be grading something at a 20 and they might be grading it at an 18, and you kind of take the average. It's just a necessary tool to have out there. Also consider the temperature. Add, like a rule of thumb is take the water temperature, which you may or may not know, but you can find it through, if you go to NOAA's websites or USGS, or you can find the temperature of the streams in the area. Add it to the air temperature, and if you are above 100 degrees for the both, you are good to go. This is a safety issue also. We do not want anybody out there in a 30-degree day in 45-degree water just because they feel like they have to get the monitoring in because that was the day they said. Be safe. We want you to be monitoring these streams year after year. We don't want you a frozen solid in the stream after just one time out there. So yeah, don't be out in lightning. Don't be out in the snow. Heavy rain, it's going to ruin your day, kind of. Safety issues, same thing. Be aware of wildlife and vegetation. The two things that you're going to come across of plants that are going to give you a reaction is poison ivy and poison sumac. If you need help identifying them, I have so many songs and mnemonic devices and little tricks. Feel free to email me. But poison ivy has those 3 leaves. Poison sumac looks a lot like that. And you'll come across that too. The biggest animal hazard you're going to find, sadly, is the smallest animal hazard you're probably going to find. It's ticks. Check yourself before, check yourself during, check yourself after. You say, well, ticks can't swim and this and that. They can be any real area. They hang on the end of a branch with their feelers out like this. They sense the temperature. If something is warm, they'll crawl on it or they'll drop right on it. So you don't even necessarily have to brush by something. Now, you might have waders on. Hopefully you tuck your pants into your socks so you kind of look like a stream monitoring weirdo, but that's the uniform for us. It helps protect you from these ticks getting in. Once you get home, check yourself. Have somebody else check you if possible. These things can really give you a run for your money, and they are hard to find. we show a picture of a vest because you could be out on public land, you could be on the border of a public-private land, there could be hunting taking place, there might be somebody that doesn't know what the heck those two people are doing deep in the woods in the stream. So, you know, have a safety vest that makes sure that you cannot be confused with an animal or somebody snooping around. Also, if you have one of these phones, put them up on eBay. It's possible they're an antique and they could be going for good money. But the reason we have this picture is to let you know that you should have your phone out there. I can't tell you how many times me or a partner has gone out not realizing the phone died, or not realizing because we've been using the phone for maps, Googling, GPS, taking pictures, uploading pictures, sharing files the whole day, that the surprise, surprise, you're at your third site for the day and your phone's dead. So make sure you have possibly battery backup, or you're charging your phone, or everything's good to go. Another thing that you're going to come across is unsheltered people in encampments. Don't disturb them just like you wouldn't disturb anybody else. And in general, don't touch or move anybody's stuff as you see it out in the river, you know. And that's just like really general housekeeping on how to be a good person when you're out there. What to bring in the field. This list you might want to screenshot. I mean, I'm not sure 100% if you'll be getting this exact PowerPoint or not, but you will be getting this sheet. I'm not going to go over every one. They're all important. Myself, Heather, and Caitlin put this list together. We parsed it down. We added things. So every single thing here is important. Make sure you have a buddy. Make sure you have a cell phone. Make sure you have enough water and potentially a snack. But I think, was that Caitlin's slide?
Yeah, but you covered everything. Yeah. My favorite is a sense of adventure. Make sure you're
Sense of
excited
adventure.
to be out there.
Yep.
But yeah.
Okay, we are rounding the bend here. Heather is muted.
Okay, what wonderful timing. So thanks so much to John and Caitlin. I want to encourage folks to reach out to John or Caitlin. Everyone should have received emails with their emails on it. Feel free to ask them questions about the presentation via email if you're pressed for time now. For some of the students who are on the call who may be interested in doing Americorps service through NJDEP, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection Watershed Ambassador Program, both John and Caitlin have gone through that program and can likely answer any of your questions that you have there. So
Definitely.
Right now, before we open it up for questions, I know some folks have to jump off, but want to know how to get involved in adopting a stream in the Lower Raritan to help us out with data gathering and data reporting. So we have 35 sites throughout the Lower Raritan that are available for monitoring, available to be adopted. You should have received this map in an email that I sent out to you last night, along with a list of all of the sites that we don't yet have volunteers committed to those streams. So I will send a follow-up email today or tomorrow, actually, to everyone who's been involved in this session, to everyone who participated, with more information about how to sign up. But basically what I'd like you to do is look at the map, look at the list of available streams, and see if there are any streams that you have a particular fondness for, that perhaps are in your backyard or in your neighborhood or community, streams that you would like to help us out with. And then we can have a conversation about getting you set up to go out and monitor, getting all of the equipment to you to do that. Whether it's a high or low gradient stream, we'll talk through all of that with you. There were a couple of questions about how to organize stewardship cleanups in your communities. specific questions about Highland Park. I know there are a number of folks on the call from Highland Park right now. So the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership does organize annual cleanups of the Mill Brook in Highland Park. The Mill Brook is not one of our headwaters monitoring locations. However, it is a stream of interest to us, and you do have a stream keeper who monitors it regularly. I will send you information about her assessments that she has turned into what's called a story map. It's a real nice visual narrative of that stream. And we will hopefully be planning a cleanup for Mother's Day in 2021 for the Millbrook. And we're looking for folks to help us plan that event. So were there other questions about adopting a stream? So when do we advertise for monitoring events? So what we ask folks to do is to adopt streams and then commit to monitoring them once or twice a year. So again, we'll provide all the information to you about your stream once you've adopted it. We'll provide you with a bucket of supplies. We'll identify whether it's high gradient or low gradient. We'll provide you all sorts of materials, a copy of this presentation, definitions, and deputize you, now that you've gone through this training, we'll deputize you to go out and gather information about that stream, about the health of that stream. You will be going out and really giving that stream a report card for how healthy it is based on what you've learned today. Given that, do folks have questions? Is there another slide here, John?
I think it's just the last one is our contact info.
Okay.
Oh, never mind.
Okay, right. So I would love to open it up for questions. I know a lot of folks have to jump off. So yeah, you can just leave this slide up, I think, right now.
Also, I'm going to throw it out there too. I know, Heather, you said if anyone, like, there might be a million reasons why you see one of these dark blue dots on here and want to check out the stream, and maybe it's in your hometown, or it might be in your backyard, or it might be something you heard about. Stream monitoring is also like a great, I mean, it's a fun hobby, but like it's a great way to see something else, and it'll take you to an area that you might have never been to before. And also a lot of these sites are near county or municipal parks. There's beautiful stuff all around these areas. So I would also pitch, instead of taking one that you know, or you've been at before, maybe take one that you've never been. Oh, did you even know that there was sandy soil in, Middlesex County or this area? Did you know that the Watchung Ridge started right in this area? So there's a lot of cool history, natural history, that you can use this as an example. Hey, I've never been to this area. Let me go out on the stream, and you could see great blue heron. You could see nesting bald eagles. You could see migratory striped bass. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on out there. So use those different reasons to check them out. But no questions. That could be a good thing.
So, well, I do want to thank everyone for coming out and for thinking about service and stewardship for the Lower Raritan. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn about monitoring and the practice of citizen science and water quality monitoring, but it's also a wonderful thing to give back and to serve. There's a question here. How much time does it take to evaluate a stream? Caitlin has suggested 2 hours. I definitely allow 2 hours. However, I'm usually in and out in about, in under an hour. So once you get the hang of it, you can do it pretty quickly.
The reason I would say schedule 2 hours is, especially the first time, I mean, it took us how long to get through the 10 parameters, and we didn't even read through each of the read through each of the boxes. We really only read optimal and then kind of gave some hints for what would make it not optimal. So yeah, you're definitely, especially the first time that you go out, going to want to sit down and take turns reading from the boxes because it can make you a little bit hoarse. But every time that I go out, I read through each of the boxes, or at least I read through optimal, and then from there go from there. So like schedule 2 hours, but it shouldn't take you that long. But also it takes some time to walk around, and you have to walk your whole 100 meters. So you have to walk about the length of a football field down the stream to look at everything, and then figure out where am I going to take my 5 widths, and then pick one of those places and take 5 depths along in one cross section. So it takes a little bit of time, but and don't forget to do, before you leave the stream, check that you filled out everything, because I've left streams before having forgotten a column or a row, or velocity. We always forget to do velocity because you always forget to take the duck with you or something like that. So always check before you leave the stream that you filled everything out, because it's very easy to miss something if you're not checking to make sure that you filled everything out.
John, do you want to put up the final slide with our contact information?
You got it. Just got to close this chat. Boom.
Great. And I again, we'll be sending everyone an email with information about this session, with information about how to get involved, with an evaluation form. So if you can please fill that out. So that's an evaluation of the session. And I'll also be sending info about a cleanup that we have on December 5th. That's next Saturday in Bound Brook. So the LRWP, the Lower Raritan Watershed Partnership, and Central Jersey Stream Team, and a bunch of other folks are going to be out in the water, cleaning up the floodplain around Greenbrook at the Greenbrook Regional Center from 10 to 1 on Saturday, December the 5th. So I'll be sending a flyer out about that opportunity for volunteering and stewardship as well. So questions, folks?
We're right at 11 o'clock too, so this is good.
Well, huge thanks to Caitlin, DiCara, and John Dugan for sharing their knowledge and expertise. I mean, these folks know the Lower Raritan watershed really well, and their contact information is up on the website here, as is mine. And if you have questions about water quality monitoring or other questions about the watershed, the health of the area, one of us will likely be able to answer. So huge thanks to all of our participants. Thanks for considering becoming a volunteer civic scientist to help us gather data so that we can improve the health of our streams and our watershed and our own health.
And thank you everyone for bearing with me as I stumble back into being a human being again. But
yeah, hopefully looking forward to seeing some people. If you're on the fence about monitoring, we can set you up with somebody who has been doing this before. If I'm going now, I can show you the ropes. It's a little scary the first time, but you get the hang of it. It actually becomes kind of fun to do. So if you're even on the fence, please be in touch. We'd love to have you out there helping us gather the data. So have a good one, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, happy monitoring. I'm going to stop the recording now. Great. Okay, wonderful job, Caitlin. Really good. You need to rest your throat.
I'm gonna go take a really fat nap.
Yeah. Okay. Go nap, and we will reconnect maybe 5:15 or so.
Yeah.
For the next session.
I'm adding. So basically, like I added a very rudimentary, just a visual to help me explain what I mean by like taking the 5 depths in different places and the 5 widths in a different place. So I added that in, and then I added, I think, 1 or 2 definitions of things that
like what epifaunal means mostly, because I'm like, as I was describing the slide, I was like, I actually have never really critically thought about what does epifaunal mean. I just am like, oh yeah, the stuff that lives in the stream. But so I added that definition. So I'll send both you and John that. But that's the only edit. It's like one or two it's all on my slides so that I can have a better time explaining it. Because it's stuff I didn't realize that I was like a little, I still explained it, but it was like, be helpful to have a boost. So I put a couple things in. So.
Okay, great. And I see, Ms. Stephen, thank you so much for bringing your students. If you have a question as to whether you can tag team, yes, absolutely. So I'm happy to have another conversation with you offline about how to get your students involved. So great, thanks.
So I'll see you at 5:15.
Okay, take care. Bye now.
Bye.